All right, it's always game day in Buffalo, 1 week away from the 2024 NFL draft. Maybe you're listening to this a little bit closer to that, but that's when we're talking. In fact, Matt, it is actually literally just 1 week away. It's 8:40 p.m. when you and I are talking on Thursday night, April 18th on this podcast. And at this exact time, a week from now, teams will be drafting. But the Bills currently where they're standing at 28, we'd still have to wait a few more hours. I looked it up. 11:30 p.m. is when pick number 28 occurred last year.
Yeah, it'll be a late night. It'll be a late night regardless of what happens. But if Brandon Beane gets anxious and antsy and decides he wants to trade up, well, at 8, we're recording this at 8:41 on Thursday. This would be like the second pick. So this is not going to happen. But maybe if he gets into the top 10, that would happen sometime between 9 and 10 o'clock. So people wouldn't have to stay up as long as they will. The draft itself is on ABC locally in Buffalo, and we can't start the 11 o'clock news until after the draft ends. But the draft doesn't end until 12:30, 12:45 in the evening. So all of the people who work back at the station to do the 11 o'clock news don't get to go home that night until late. And that's kind of the case now for the next few months, because not only is the draft, we also have NBA playoffs and NBA finals. And those nights are especially tricky when it's like a 9:09 tip on the West Coast. And then it goes to overtime and you're like, wow, just let me go home.
Well, we will talk more about when they will draft a little bit later in this podcast, because this is probably the last pod we're going to have before the draft. Now, if something really major or significant happens, we'll try to bring you as much content as we can on that, if it does happen before the draft. But between now and the draft, this should be the last one, because, Matt, we are going to talk again. But when we talk again, we're going to have Mike North on the next podcast. We're scheduled to talk to him next Monday night is when we're going to record the week leading up to the draft. And we want everybody to know that, because maybe people have schedule questions out there that they want to send us to ask our buddy, Mike North, when he joins us next week.
Yeah, it's like I mentioned on the end of the last episode, it is my favorite one that we do every single year. I am a schedule junkie. I cannot get enough of it. I think it's so interesting how they put all the pieces together. He is very graciously kind of given us little tidbits of news over the last couple times that we've done it. So hopefully that continues again. I actually had a few people who were tweeting about this today, or they weren't tweeting at me, but I saw them tweeting about it. And it's an interesting theory, but they were saying they think the Bills would start the season on the road against the Texans. Against Diggs week 1.
I can see it.
But I was thinking about it. Do you really think they would start 3 years in a row on the road?
I don't think it matters. The Cincinnati Bengals started 7 straight years on the road not too long ago.
Really? I did not know that. I did not know that was a thing. I don't know. That seems a little excessive. And also, if it's Texans-Bills, that's probably a primetime game. So not only would it be 3 straight seasons to start the year on the road, it would be 3 straight years to start on the road in primetime, which is just really weird to me. Like, it doesn't feel like that needs to be a week 1 game.
I don't disagree with you. I think that their chances are less, but I don't think it really matters when they look at it. And in fact, though, I would also tell you this, though, Matt, they do have more of a chance to open on the road than home, because you have more road games this year. You have 9 road games and 8 home games. So, but yeah, if you go back and look, I believe it was 2011 through 2018 that the, or 17 or 18, that the, maybe 9 through 16, something like that, though. The Bengals every year on the road, like 7 straight seasons, they opened up the season on the road. It was a thing when they had a home game. But if anybody wants to tweet at us, at Sal Sports, at Matt_Bove, questions for Mike North on the schedule pod, we are very excited for that. We're also very excited to, talk about what happened at One Bills Drive on Thursday, because the Bills were finally back. They've been there all week working out. Sean McDermott said about 95% participation rate with the guys coming in at the voluntary workouts. We heard from Brandon Beane. We heard from Sean McDermott. We heard from Josh Allen and Terrel Bernard. Let's, I guess, go in order here. Brandon Beane is who we heard from first. Was there anything that stuck with you from what you heard from Brandon Beane?
That he said he doesn't think the Bills need a number 1 wide receiver, or what we think is a number 1 wide receiver, which makes me think they do need a number 1 wide receiver, and they are planning on addressing it. I saw Bill Belichick say on the Pat McAfee show, whether you like Bill Belichick or you hate Bill Belichick, I thought his opinion was valid, that the week leading up to the draft, the months leading up to the draft, you cannot believe almost anything until you're in that like 24-hour window, and then actual leaks kind of start happening, and you have to monitor that. I am not saying that Brandon Beane lied to us. I think that they can get to that point in their head of saying, like, hey, with the right weapons, we think we can have success here. But they want a receiver that they pick or a receiver that they trade for to be a number one. They want them to be as good as possible, right? Like, that's the upside there. You don't draft a receiver because you're like, yeah, you know what, this is a good, safe pick. We just think that his floor is pretty high, even though his ceiling isn't very high. So we're going to go with that. No, they want to, of course, they want to find a number one wide receiver. Every team wants to find a number one wide receiver.
I agree with everything you just said. And it's always tough because you don't want to say Brandon Beane's a liar, but we all know that he's going to say what is beneficial to him and not give things away. The way I look at it is what he said on Thursday about, hey, we don't have to have one to be successful. And he said, I'm not sitting here thinking we have a gaping hole. Mm-hmm. What he's doing, Matt, to me is he's just doesn't want to give up any leverage. Because if he wants to move up in the draft, or if he wants to trade for a player, if it's a Brandon Ayuk or a T. Higgins, whatever, if there's somebody out there who's available, he does not want to put himself in a position where that team says, oh no, baby, you just told your fans you need one. You better come out with one somehow here. So you got to pay even more than what the going rate is and what I would have asked you for. So I just think that that's what he's doing here. Now, I also would tell you, in his heart of hearts, he probably believes, look, if we didn't have one, or if we got one, he is injured, we have Josh Allen and we can still be successful. But I think Brandon Beane understands and knows that the best way for this team to take the next step and to continue on the path they're on and to take the next step is to make sure they have a bona fide number one true guy. And that guy's not on the roster, admitted by him. He said, we don't have a guy to fill the number one role right now.
Yeah. And I think that it's probably unrealistic to think whoever they take, assuming they take a wide receiver, can immediately step in and fill that role. So this is going to be a conversation that we have over the course of the next several months, all the way through the season, unless they do something crazy. If they make a trade for a legitimate player, or they trade into the top 10 for one of the top three guys, then I think you can have the conversation of, okay, they've replaced Stephon Diggs. But even if they make a trade up in the first round to get like a Brian Thomas Jr. or an A.D. Mitchell, I don't feel good saying that they've got a new number one wide receiver. I think those players have the potential to be a new number one wide receiver, but I think there are very few things that could actually happen that have me saying, okay, they've definitely found their number one. I think whatever they do is going to be, okay, this guy has the potential to get there, but the offense is going to look different, and I think they know that, even though obviously this is still a very big priority for them.
So you know how when you read something, it can look or sound different than when you actually are there, right? Well, that happened today, I think, with his quote about the top 10. What he said was, hey, I'm not getting any calls from teams in the top 10, and you wouldn't expect to. He said, but there's no rule that says I can't call anyone in the top 10. If you see that quote, there's no rule that says I can't call anybody. You kind of it looks like he's saying, hey, I need to jump up there. He wasn't saying that. What he was really saying was, look, I can do it if I want. But then he also looked at John Worrell, who asked the question. He said, you think they'll take my call, John? Which is basically him saying, look, it's very, very hard to do that. It's probably a waste of everybody's time if you try to do that. I also wouldn't rule it out, Matt, that he makes those calls, and you never know what's going to happen. I mean, today, his good buddy Joe Shane is talking about how he was stunned, or he's surprised. I don't know if you saw this. Joe Shane was talking about how surprised he was how much interest there is in the number 6 pick. So maybe that's just him drumming up more capital. Who knows? But I wouldn't doubt that Brandon Beane might make a call like that, but I do find it interesting. He talked about, the challenges of trying to go that high. Now, he also said that, as the further you get down, obviously you might be able to do something like that. And he used Dalton Kincaid last year as an example of, look, he said, I had a deal in place to move back. I really liked the deal, but he really liked Dalton Kincaid. And he took the chance. If there's a guy there and I need to get him, I want to get him because I want to go to bed on Thursday night thinking that I got the guy I wanted.
That's the quote. The part of all of the long answer that, like, I want to go to bed at night knowing that I got my guy, basically, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's why I have always thought, and also evidence shows us this, that the Bills are way more likely to move up than they are to move back, even though logically and from a resource standpoint, moving back might make more sense. Now that they do not have a third-round pick, it would make a lot of sense that if you were at 28 and you didn't love any of the receivers, to move back into the second round, probably add a third-round pick, and then all of a sudden you can add 3 guys on day 2. That would be a really nice haul for the Bills. But I just don't think Brandon Beane is wired that way. I think that when he says they've got more first round grades than they did last year, but not 28, in my mind, that means I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that I am picking a guy in the first round that I believe has a first round grade, and then we'll figure out all the other stuff. I also thought it was interesting how he said the drop off from his first round grades to his second round grades is not nearly as significant as their drop off from like an early second round grade to a late second round grade. So I feel like there's a lot more like kind of players like in that range, which does make the possibility of a move back interesting, but I still don't think it's super likely, even though it probably should be, because I do think it would be pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with that about his quote about the drop off and where the difference is right there. And that might mean that he wants to go down and get, extra picks. I also still find it very significant that they got a second round pick next year after not getting that third round comp pick, where they said that kind of messed up their plans and kind of blew up, some of what they wanted to do. So he doesn't get the third, he gets the fourth. So now he goes out and he gets a second next year. Well, what else did he say today? He said, and we all know this, but he said it, if you're talking about next year's draft picks, you're always paying a round higher. Well, that means, guess what, Matt? A third round pick this year is equal to what? A second round pick next year. So he wanted to use that third round pick this year. He thought he was going to get as capital. He got it back in the form of a second round pick next year.
I also think it just gives you more flexibility if there's something that happens that you love, because there is a way that they could convince themselves in their head that the Minnesota pick would be a higher second round pick than what theirs is. You would think that right now. Minnesota's kind of in a great spot to get a franchise quarterback if they can get up the board. And that would be a really good, successful landing spot because of the pieces that they have. But if Minnesota is an okay team, that pick is going to be in the late 30s or the early 40s. Now, if you're the Bills, you could say, we don't want to give up our first next year, but if we love something, maybe we only wait 10 picks later than we would have picked in the first round anyway.
Great point.
Like if they finish this season the same way they did this year or for the last several years, and they're in this range of like 26 to 30, kind of where they've been, the Vikings could be picking 5 or 6 picks after that. And then it's like, well, then it's worth it because, yeah, we gave up a 1, but we also got a Roma Dunze or a Malik Neighbors. So I just think that it's an interesting poker chip to have because if, let's say, you want to make a big move and that requires 2 1s and a 2, that's a lot, but you could maybe keep the Minnesota 2. I think that it's a really interesting position.
The Bills general manager, Brandon Beane, spoke. There's a lot more that you can hear and see. WGR 550 and, of course, WKBW TV, Channel 7 in Buffalo, where Matt Bove is. I'm Sal Capaccio, and we also heard from the Bills head coach, Sean McDermott. All right, Matt, so I'll tell you, and I'll start this time and tell you the big thing I took away from Sean McDermott. This is more of a big picture thing, okay? It wasn't anything specific he said and led me to, ooh, this or that. The tone of him, though, was a lot about the change in leadership and the changing culture of a new team. We've talked a lot here about this is kind of being the next iteration of the Bills, right? Like they have this new roster, they're turning over, but you think about it. They've lost now this year alone. Mitch Morse, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, who was a captain, Micah Hyde, who it looks like he's not going to be back, Jordan Poyer, Saran Neal even. I mean, these are guys who've been big parts and cornerstones, but also big leaders. And he even said Josh Allen, that's a big focus of his game that he's worked on is being, a leader, a certain leader, better leader, whatever, however you want to phrase it. Not that he was a bad leader in any respect, but even Josh taking on more of that leadership role. But I just found it really interesting that Sean McDermott really talked a lot about that piece and how much that's transitioning. And what's interesting too, on top of that is, who do we hear from after Josh Allen? One other guy, Terrel Bernard, a third-year middle linebacker.
Did you remember my question? I tried to get Sean to take the bait. He didn't. It was not like a try and catch him question, but I asked him if there were any specific players that he thought were ready to take on kind of like that added leadership role, just for what they mean off the field. Because Terrel Bernard was the layup. He said, I don't want to say one guy because then I'm going to forget somebody else. And in that way I heard, and I very much understand that. I'm not trying to paint him in a corner, but I can tell you who these leaders are just from being around the team and from watching them play football. And a lot of people listening can probably as well. Terrel Bernard is one of them, and Taron Johnson is one of them. Those are 2 guys who I think are going to have far bigger roles. obviously on the field, they've always been very important, or at least for the last year, they were very important. But like those are guys who are now building block pieces for the Buffalo Bills. Even though, like, if you're listening and you're like, well, what about Matt Milano? I can tell you what, Matt Milano is an incredible football player, just like a very chill, nice dude who I don't think is going to be Mr. Rah-Rah get in anybody's face. Terrel Bernard is just built a little bit differently. So like
I'll
those
say
are
this,
guys.
I don't, not that you're saying you have to, I know that, but not all captains have to get in someone's face. But I agree with you about Matt Milano. He's not the kind of guy that's going to command the room like that. He's just going to go out there and ball, and that's just great, right? And that's what he wants to do. Whereas you have other guys who are a little bit more vocal, and it doesn't have to always be, like I said, you could have leadership takes all forms. We know that. You could be a guy that gets in someone's face and, you know, to hold them and tell them, and, you know, I don't know, would Chris Drury qualify? I don't even know if he was like that necessarily, but you know, these guys are so well respected.
Yeah.
But then you could also be a guy that's just, hey man, he goes about his business every day. He's a good captain. He's a good leader. He talks with me off to the side, a Lorenzo Alexander type, right?
Yeah.
Someone like that you could have. Deion Dawkins could fit into a leadership role, especially some of the things he said this offseason and, you know, getting him, you know, viral and some of the things he said about the Jets. I'll give you another one. I think Rasul Douglas could be a leader of this team now that he's been here for half a season and an off season.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good call. The one that I'm interested in, I feel like it's easy to find them on defense. It's a little bit trickier on offense. After Josh and after Deion, then I start to go, like Dawson, I think is a good example, but I think Dawson's a little bit more like Matt Milano than he is like some of the other guys, where it's like he'll try and lead by his example. He'll, you know, perform on the field when he needs to, but I don't necessarily know, you know, what his leadership style is like. And this is not meant to be like a knock on any of these guys or, you know, really kind of shining them up. I just, it's harder to find those guys on offense than it is on defense, because there's, I think, a lot more options on the defensive side of the ball.
The guy on offense I'd look at and wonder about is Connor McGovern, now that he slides over to center. And like, you know, he's been in this league, he's played different positions, you know, and he's a guy that's got to make calls now. And, you know, we'll see where that goes. But that was, to me, the big thing from Sean was how he really talked about that. And it wasn't just with the players, by the way. It's the coaches. He has new coaches. He's got coaches in different roles, leading the coaches. You see that piece coming together. So this is kind of that feeling out session. He also said that they have yet to determine who's going to call plays on the defensive side. I think we both agree it's going to be Bobby Babich, right?
Yeah, I kind of feel like that too. I
think it's going to be Bobby Babich for sure.
Yeah, I kind of feel like him playing this out is, you know, to make sure that Bobby's ready and up to speed and knows everything that's going on. And he's doing this as a way of kind of like easing him into it a little bit. No doubt.
Anything else from Sean McDermott that he talked about, whether it's the Stefon Diggs, you know, piece and losing him, or?
No, nothing Sean said today was, it wasn't bad or anything. It was just, I thought the really like newsworthy things were certainly from Josh, and then obviously from Brandon. You know, we talked to Brandon for a long time, and I thought there were some things that Brandon said that were super interesting today, but you know, he's not going to show his hand when talking about specifically draft stuff. All the other stuff I thought was very interesting, but I thought walking out of that press room today, I thought the Josh Allen stuff was the most notable.
All right. So what do you think about Josh? Go right ahead on that.
I think, and this is just my read on it, maybe my body language expertise is just off. I just thought he was very calm and in control. And it just felt like he just kind of kept taking the high road, which is what we'd expect with Josh Allen. He's always that way. But it just felt like a little bit of a different vibe than what we've seen at times in the past. Now, I will say this. This is a very important caveat. It's April. They're not getting ready for a game. They're not coming off of a game. He was playing golf last week. He's probably playing golf next week. Things are probably really good right now for Josh Allen. So sure, he was probably in a better mood than he normally is, and you know, more comfortable giving us more of his time and maybe peeling back the curtain a little bit more. But I thought there were some things that he said today that were really, really interesting about kind of how he views himself as a leader and where this team can go as they kind of begin this next phase.
The Stefon Diggs stuff. He was asked, of course, about Stefon. Said that he texted. That was one of the things that was debated a lot on social media today. The fact that Josh said he texted Stefon. I mean, you might have gotten it too. I got a bunch of people telling me, "Oh, send him a text, not a phone call." I don't know what to tell you. That's how people communicate these days, especially 20-something-year-olds, right? I mean, I text my wife all the time, 100 times a day, right? We text back and forth. I do call some people once in a while, and I believe in calling people, but generally texting, yes, you text people. That's what you do sometimes, and it's just the easiest form and easiest way. I didn't think anything of it. Maybe you feel differently. I didn't think he had to say like, oh, I didn't think it was any indictment whatsoever. They didn't actually talk on the phone.
No, I didn't get it as like an indictment or anything. I just it was in the back of my mind of like, well, he always talks about how he'll like FaceTime Brian Dable or how he'll like get on the phone and talk to Brandon Beane, but this was only I don't think there's anything. I don't want to like manufacture a story or something here. I thought about it. I don't think it's a big deal, but I thought about it when he said he texted him. I was like, oh, I would have thought that maybe like you went to dinner. I don't know where you guys are in the world, but like maybe go to dinner and like or get a phone. I don't know. Whatever. I don't think it's a big deal. I talk to people on the phone a lot, so I'm the opposite. Like I would much rather talk to somebody on the phone than text them.
I don't like. I'm like you in a lot of ways, and you and I talk on the phone once in a while. Like instead of just texting, we'll call each other to kind of talk about the show or whatever, and that's fine. I'm also still a people person like that. My point is, though, that's just the way most of the world communicates, especially younger people these days, that they text. Because I think what you'd like to know is, okay, and I don't know this, when they normally communicated, was it through text or was it FaceTime? He might say he FaceTimes Brandon Beane because they have fun like that, but I'd be willing to bet, and I don't know this, 99% of the way that Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs communicated for the last 4 years was through text when they were together.
Yeah, you're probably right. They also live much different lives than we live, where they're on the go and like they're probably on private jets, and it's just a lot easier to text each other than it is for me when I'm sitting on my couch or walking my dog in the neighborhood. Like I'm available to talk on the phone. They've probably got other things going on. I don't think it's a huge deal. I think the fact that they reached out to each other and, you know, like I said, Josh took the high road. That is exactly what I would expect. And honestly, that's exactly what I would expect from Stephon Diggs too. Even though he's been poking fun on social media and there's been the continuous cryptic things, I certainly do not think Diggs would have been, you know, snarky in a response or, you know, not genuine. Like I do think there really was a special bond there for a long time, and whatever happened to it, or if anything even did happen to it, that doesn't take away, you know, what they were able to accomplish together.
And by the way, Josh did say that Stephon did text him back, so that everybody knows that. He said that Stephon did text him back. The other thing, I was trying to think, there was something else maybe about Josh. You know, I mean, I know that this is the kind of the nerdy football stuff that I like, right?
You loved the snap question, didn't you? Well, it was your question.
I asked
you loved the response.
I think it's amazing.
It's great. It was so interesting. It was so much more interesting than I thought it would have been.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I think those are the things that like we never really. And I think about this stuff as a coach, right? I coached high school football, and these are little things that I think about, which is, okay, you got a new center. It's not as easy as just putting your hands on his butt and saying, snap me the ball. Like there's a way you have to do it. And especially because you have a different size guy. And not only is he maybe like his butt's a different size, right? I mean, like it's just, there's different ways of going about this. So I asked Josh Allen specifically, what's it like to work with a new center physically? And he said, I thought it was interesting. He said, you know, a lot of guys just like it right in the middle. He said Mitch Morse was more of a left side guy, meaning when he snaps it up, it's more to the left side of his body, his groin. And Josh was used to that. So whenever another center came in, he would say, can you do that? Because that's what he's used to doing. And he said sometimes that's also just because of where he wants his hands when the snap comes and how he wants to drop back and the placement of the ball. So working with Connor McGovern, that's something they're going to have to work through as well. It was super interesting. I think it was just a little insight into how much these guys really pay so much detail to their craft. And I even compared it to, is it like working with a new wide receiver when you do option routes and where are you going to be at this specific time? He said that's actually a really good comparison, because there are all these nuances you don't normally think about that you have to take care of.
Well, he even talked about in the gun, taking snaps out of the gun and knowing where their misses are. And he's like, well, if a guy's miss is to this side, or if they're about to snap and I know they're pulling to the right, I'm going to make sure my hands are to the left, because that's where the more likely miss is going to be, just in case it catches me off guard. So I have that split extra second to kind of like, you know, get the ball back into position and then go from there. And I'm like, wow, that is just such an interesting, you know, you did that video years ago with Reed Ferguson about like the intricacies of long snapping. And to me, that's mind-boggling how many things go into something that is so overlooked in the game. as far as long snapping is concerned. And that's why, we're in this draft process and we talk about route running and we talk about all these intangibles. Like all of this stuff matters. And all of this stuff is something that can take you from just another guy to a guy that has a lot of success in the league. So I really do like all of these little intricacies. And I thought the snap thing was a really good example of that. My big takeaway from Josh today was actually the question from Matt Perino, so the other Matt in the room today, about navigating all of the noise and what Josh learned about himself as a leader through the process. And I thought it was very interesting that he said, for so much of my time here, I've always kind of viewed myself as one of the guys, right? Like I very much feel like I am, but I also need to know that people look to me and expect me to be a little bit different, and that I need to lead them the way they need to be led. And I just think that that's interesting, especially as we
good.
especially as we begin this kind of next chapter for the Bills. When you walk in the door, if you've never played for the Bills before, for this week of voluntary workouts, the first person you're going to look for when you walk onto the field is Josh Allen. And you're going to see what's he doing, how's he interacting with people. And from all of the times that we've watched Josh, he's one of the guys. He's having fun. He's screwing around. But he also needs to know when to turn it on and when to get serious. And I think that he realizes that now. He was like, listen, the minute you become a franchise quarterback, the minute you get your second contract, people start expecting more from you. And I need to know that that's my role. Now, he is a pretty humble dude. So he's not going to put himself in the absolute upper echelon. He put himself in the tier of other quarterbacks on their second contracts. He is so much more than that. He is the most important person in that organization by leaps and bounds, and is on the trajectory to be maybe the most important athlete in the history of Buffalo professional sports. So what he does makes an impact, even if he doesn't think it does. And I think now he's starting to realize that more and will become a better leader because of it.
It's a great point. I love it. I love the question, the answer, how Josh handled it. We'll see. I mean, look, there's a video of at the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes getting after who was it on the sidelines? I can't remember. Was it Sky Moore maybe?
Yeah, it might have been.
He was getting after somebody on the sidelines, the Super Bowl. And, it was kind of like he wasn't being a jerk. I mean, you guys could look at it that way. He was being a quarterback and telling them like, hey, this is what I'm looking at. And you need to understand that. And this is not a criticism, but it is a wondering. Like, I've never seen Josh do that. And I'm not telling you he has to do that, but I do think he has to be willing to do that. And I don't know if we've ever seen that from him or of his willingness even to do it.
Yeah, well, that's part of when you're one of the guys. When you're one of the guys, you don't necessarily do that, but you got to find the balance of being somebody who teammates can have a good time with and laugh with, and who can play cards with and go to the golf simulator with, but also the most important person on the field. So it's a really interesting thing that he needs to, just another layer to all of this, because I know that sometimes this stuff gets overblown. Oh, who cares who's a captain? Like, it really doesn't matter. And I get that. Like, a lot of times it does get overblown, but the importance of Josh Allen cannot be overstated to the organization. And I think what he does and his actions, not even necessarily just on the field in a game, mean a lot.
Well, one other guy spoke, and he said something that kind of it went a little bit viral when I tweeted it out today. So let's get to that too. Terrel Bernard, middle linebacker, comes out, and I said to him today, I said, Matt, Terrell, you're an undersized guy. No disrespect, right? He's like, yeah, I know, right? So I said, but like, how have you had to kind of change or alter your approach because you're undersized? And he's like, not really. And then he talked about his weight and how he said that he gained some pounds. He's a little heavier this offseason. I said, oh, what do you normally play at? What do you now? Well, I normally play at 225. I came in this year around 226 or 227. I'm going to see how that feels and how it works. And I'm thinking, and same thing with you, like, exactly, dude, it's 1 pound, maybe 2 at the most. So I tweeted it out for that reason. Like, dude, this guy actually cares that he might be 1 or 2 pounds different. Now, a lot of the reaction was me putting out the quote about him being only 1 or 2 pounds and people saying that's not newsworthy. No, I agree. What's the reason why I put it out there was, holy cow, that's amazing.
Mhm.
He actually thinks and believes, and probably rightfully so for himself, that 1 or 2 pounds can make that much of a difference to him.
Yeah, absolutely. The detail that goes
Yes.
into this. And I'll say this, it's 1 year. I do not want to, completely be a prisoner of the moment. I think Terrel Bernard is such a dude. I think he
Yeah,
is such a
I agree.
cornerstone piece for this team, and I think that they didn't know what they were getting 100%, but they loved the upside and they loved the person, right? Like that was another thing Brandon
Yeah.
Beane talked about today about these top 30 visits and that they did all of them. And he was like, a lot of it is to kind of break ties. Like we want to get these guys in face to face and spend more time with them because if they're close to another guy we have on the board, we'll use all that other stuff, their personality, the way they interact with people, and move them up, or we'll move them up or down a little bit. For Terrel Bernard, he's just such a hard worker and like a natural leader and the energy that comes off of that guy. And then when you see what he puts into his craft, I just think the sky is the limit for a player like that. It wasn't that long ago that an undersized linebacker jumped onto the scene in Buffalo and has become an incredible player for this team with the guy he plays next to in Matt Milano. And I know it's only 1 year, but like I think Terrel Bernard has the skill set to be a cornerstone piece for this defense for the next, like, and his body and his size and his skill set translates to like a long career too. This is not somebody who I think is going to get worn down earlier than other people. I think he could be around for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because he is undersized and he does play very physical. But you know what? Who else is just like that? Taron Johnson. And after suffering a few injuries early in his career, Taron really had to learn how to play at that size, at that position, right? And he's done that. And I think Terrell's kind of already done that. And the ankle injury he suffered last year wasn't because of his size, obviously. It was just a
No,
freak
just
accident. But he also said that he's very healthy. Matt, if I was to list the things that I'm excited about for the Buffalo Bills in 2024, right near the top of the list would be the pairing of Bernard and Milano at linebacker.
Yeah, there's been such an exodus of players from this team that their entire core is going to look different. But I remember specifically after the Tre'Davious White injury in the Miami game, saying that they were better prepared for an injury like that because it was the most talented roster I think they've ever had. And a lot of that was because of the combination of Daquan Jones looking like a dude next to Ed Oliver and Matt Milano and Terrel Bernard looking just like an absolute force in the middle. And then the next week, Daquan Jones and Matt Milano go down and basically miss the entire season. So we've really only seen 4 games of those two playing together at that high caliber. And also, like the first game that they lost was not at all because of the defense, right? Like the Zach Wilson game had nothing to do with the defense not playing well. So they played really well in all 4 of those games, and then the injuries happened. So I think that you're right. That should be very high on people's lists of things that they're excited about.
The another thing, Terrell Bernard talked about was Bobby Babich. And, he was asked about Babich as defensive coordinator, and he really just talked glowingly. And I think it just kind of paints the picture of why a part of the reason, a big part of the reason why Babich was hired and elevated, not John Butler, who's now stepped away and, he's not involved with the team right now. Not Eric Washington, who's with the Chicago Bears. I think listening to a guy like Terrell Bernard, it's not just that Bobby Babich is smart and he's young and, he's done a really good job developing safeties and developing linebackers. When you hear the players like Terrell Bernard talk about how much he's meant to them personally, I think that was probably a big reason why he was elevated to the role that he's been elevated to.
Yeah, I think so too. I also think that there's going to be a learning curve. And I think that people should hopefully kind of, I don't want to say give him a longer leash, but he is a first time coordinator, right? Like we saw how it worked. I'm not saying that he's destined for the same thing. Saw how it worked out with Ken Dorsey. It didn't work out. Joe Brady didn't work out the first time. Then he got a second opportunity. So I think that Bobby Babich is going to be good at his job, but like give it time. Like he's got to learn on the job. And I think Sean McDermott is going to kind of let him do that. The nice thing about for Babich is that if things don't go well, Sean McDermott can help you along the way because he managed to do both last year. They don't really have that on offense. Like, you know what I mean? Like if they had an offensive minded head coach, maybe Ken Dorsey would have worked out better, but it didn't. And that's just the reality of having a defensive minded head coach.
All right, let's just wrap up on the draft a little bit here since it's our last time talking, most likely before the draft. Like we said, we can add a few things in with the Mike North podcast if we have to when we talk with him coming up on Monday night. But at this point, have you kind of decided on, and are you firmly in one camp or the other on them trading up, staying where they are, or trading down?
Yeah, I think they trade up, but I don't think it's a huge trade up. I think it's like a mini trade up because, that's what history tells us they do. How about you?
I'm going to say the same thing, but I'm more starting to lean towards trade down than I had before after
Okay.
listening to Brandon Beane. I still think
Interesting.
trade up is the most likely possibility. It's what he does. And I just think he's been building capital to do this. I don't think they have 10 draft picks that are going to make the roster. He knows that.
Mhm.
So I think that he would be comfortable with, giving up some capital to move up. But after listening to him and after looking at the wide receiver depth and looking at it for a while now in
Mhm.
the draft, I do think there's a possibility he moves down, depending how the
Yeah.
board falls.
Do you think there's a better chance that I feel like of these three options, trade up, trade down, pick at 28, I feel like pick at 28 is the third most
I
likely
agree
thing.
with you.
Do
That
you agree with
crazy.
me?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree
it's
with you.
crazy. I don't see it happening. I think that they either go up or they go down, but I don't think they stay put.
What about position or player? Do you have anybody you've kind of locked in on here that you think that maybe might fit the bill? No pun intended.
Well done. I think that I would have said Brian Thomas Jr. for a lot of this process.
Mhm.
But I think the more research I've done, it feels like AD Mitchell is the riser.
Really?
So I don't necessarily, I just think that I saw a clip of Adam Schefter and they were talking about where AD Mitchell could go. I've also seen the betting lines of the over unders for these guys. And Brian Thomas Jr. and AD Mitchell have the exact same betting line. The pick is 17 and a half. Are they picked before or after 17? So it's a really interesting line when you consider that the Bills are at 28. To me, that reads like one of them will go before that and one of them will go after that. I don't know which one it'll be. If AD Mitchell is the one that goes after that, that's when I think the Bills could kind of make a move up. And I know there might be people who listen to this and groan because they don't love the idea of trading up for him because he's not considered like the clear cut four like Brian Thomas Jr. has been for most of this.
Mhm.
But I think those two guys are the ones who I would say are the most likely fits for the Bills if they do make a small trade up.
I don't know if AD Mitchell is their flavor. There's stuff coming out now that apparently he has diabetes. I don't know. I don't know if that's confirmed, but I read about that, and he's got to
Mhm.
maintain a little bit. There's blood sugar, um, concerns there, and unfortunately, right? I mean, so
Mhm.
those are things I think you have to kind of navigate through. Also, though, I think that one of the things that could tip to this guy I'm thinking of is Xavier Worthy has such great return ability. And I
Mhm.
wonder if that might be a reason why they'd look at him before a guy like AD Mitchell, his teammate, because they don't have a true return man on this team right now. And that's not the only reason, but Xavier Worthy was also the fastest guy ever at the combine.
Yeah.
And he can what have we heard all offseason? Rack, run after catch. This
Uh-huh.
guy with the ball in his hands, all the things he could do right now. I know they got Curtis Samuel, but that's a guy I think that we maybe start to look a little bit more at. But I also think that if Brian Thomas Jr. was there and they can get their hands on him, that would be a little more likely. Now, the dream scenario is I think Brandon Beam would absolutely love to go up and get Roma Dunze if he fell that far. I just don't think he's going to be able to fall far enough for him to do it.
Where do you think? Falling to 9? Like, I mean,
If he got to 9, he might be able to get up there. We've seen 27-10 from the Chiefs
mhm.
with the Bills, right?
Yeah.
If he goes to 9, he might. It feels like he's going to go before that though.
Really? See, I don't necessarily I feel like 9 is kind of the 9-10, like, right? Like,
Okay,
I feel like there's going to be and this even goes to 6 with Joe Shane. If there's a run on quarterbacks, if it goes QB, 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 and then the Giants are sitting there and they're like, well, like, come on. Like,
right.
obviously, what are we doing? So they could either say, okay, we're going to get a legit wide receiver. We're going to get Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. or even Roma Dunze, any of the three. Or we could add a bunch of assets to do what we did in Buffalo and then have the flexibility of moving up and add a first round pick. And I don't know if they would be willing to go that far down, if they would be willing to fall from 6 to 28. But I don't know. When he said that thing about going to bed at night, knowing that you got your guy, that's the thing that creeps back in your head of like, I wonder how aggressive he's going to be. I wonder if he's willing to give up 2 1s and some for one of those guys.
What is the most likely position if it's not wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills with their first pick?
Edge rusher, I think. I think one of the edge rushers. I think that probably is their second biggest need, just because I don't know what Von Miller is anymore. I don't know how to project what he is. I'm going in anticipating nothing. And then anything that you get almost will feel like a pleasant surprise. But I don't like their chances on consistently getting pressure if their starters are Greg Rousseau and AJ Epinesa. I think that they can be a serviceable defensive line, but not a take over a game or make a huge play defensive line.
I don't disagree. I think edge rusher would be number one. I do think interior defensive line would also be near the top of that list. Probably somewhere on the defensive line would be the answer. I did almost daily. I do these 1 minute videos. I call them Sal 60, put them out there and try to give everybody a little hot take or just a thought on something. And one I did the other day was stop mocking a corner to the Bills. All the rest of you people out there who say they need one. I watched this like Giants cast. The New York Giants guys were doing it, and you're not. I understand people aren't as close to the team as we are here, so it's no disrespect to them. But they're like, one guy asked the other, "Where do you see them going?" They're like, "Man, they gotta, really, they need some help at corner." Like, no, they don't. We've talked about this. Like Christian Benford was really good, but they did have Cooper DeJean in for a visit, and he can play corner and safety, and he's fantastic. And Brandon Beane talked glowingly about, he said, whoever takes him, they have to decide. And I'm thinking, is he saying that because it's kind of a smokescreen that they really want to take him? Do you think that's possible? Or was I wrong to say in that video, stop mocking them a corner?
This might be one of those situations where I'm reading too much into it, but I believe from what I read, he only took 4 top 30 visits. So, like, on his end, he was prioritizing the Bills. So I don't know if that means anything or if that's just like circumstance, but they get 30. Like, you would feel like the guy who is believed by many to be the top defensive back in the class would have taken more than 4 top 30 visits, but he did come to Buffalo. So I'm not anticipating it, but at the same time, it's like, well,
but am I wrong, you think, to say that? Like, do you think the Bills could do it? Like from their end, not his end?
But... Well, I'm not saying they should, but what's stopping them from bringing him here and playing safety this year and then moving him to corner in the future?
That would be it, right? If they did that, he's coming here to play safety
now, but maybe not forever. If they use a first round pick on a safety, listen, I know, like, Kyle Hamilton is the exception. Look at Kyle Hamilton play and you go, yeah, he's worth the first round pick. If they use a first round pick on a safety, I think there's going to be a lot of people really confused at some of the other decisions that they've made, like the Mike Edwards move, like the Taylor Rapp move. I know that those are not moves that should alter your long-term vision for the organization. It just doesn't feel like Sean McDermott gets a lot out of safeties. It doesn't feel like you would need to use this big of a resource to get a guy.
Right. I agree with that. Now, this is why I say what I say, because if it is Cooper, and it is DeJean, right? Not DeJean. I want to make sure.
I honestly have heard it both ways.
Okay. If it is Cooper DeJean, he has to play safety, because this is what I say and why I say stop mocking them a corner. I can't see a scenario, Matt. This is not like D-line where they rotate. If they take a D lineman, he's going to play. He's going to rotate. He's going to play. They take a wide receiver, he's going to play. If they take a corner, he's not playing this year unless there's an injury. No. He's not beating out Russell Douglas or Christian Benford. And that's why I say I don't think they would think about doing that.
No. I it's not impossible, but at the same time, you called it last year. I didn't. A week from the draft last year, I would not have thought the tight end was something that they did. And they kind of surprised us all. So I don't know. Tight end was adjacent to wide receiver. What is their adjacent need this year? Safety to corner. I guess that this would fit kind of both boxes. So if they love the player, I mean, they're picking 28. We just said we think it's the least likely outcome of the 3 things, that trading up, trading back, or staying at 28. If they stay at 28, but they have him graded as a mid-teens grade of a first-round pick, they might just do it.
All right, before we get you out of here, I have to ask you, Matt Bove.
Oh, no. Are you going to ask me about Don Granato and the Sabres?
More so of the future. Do you have a top 3 candidates that you'd like to see?
Do I get to include Rod Brindamore, even though it probably will never happen?
Yes. He's my number one.
Yeah, he would be my
Because
number
until
one.
he signs his deal,
Uh-huh.
he's a free agent at the end of the year.
Yeah, I don't think it'll get to that point. Like, I think the Sabres are going to announce who they hire before the Hurricanes have probably even been eliminated from the playoffs.
Okay.
The only reason we're even having this conversation is because Kevin Adams and Rod Brindamore are friends. Like, they won a Stanley Cup together in Carolina. So if he wants another challenge, sure. Like, I think that that's probably Kevin Adams' first order of business. It's, I need to see if there's any chance of Rod Brindamore happening. If there's not, then I'm going to start going to the other guys. The other guys are, does Mike Sullivan get fired from Pittsburgh? Because if he does, he's probably in my top 3. Craig Berube is in the conversation. But right now, I would say Craig Berube is probably the top available candidate. So this one now is on him. Where does he want to go? If he has the option of Buffalo, of New Jersey, of potentially Philly, of whatever other teams are looking for head coaches. And then the other one is Gerard Gallant. And like, it's interesting to me because he has had success everywhere he's gone, but he's also never worked out. So like, that's really weird. Why? Why isn't he working out long-term with these teams? Why has he had a few stops over the course of the last several years? I don't know the answer to that. So right now, I'd say Rod Brindamore's number 1, Berube's 2, and then a tie for 3 with Gallant and Sullivan.
Wow. No Lindy Ruff at all.
No. But I think that would be their backup plan. I think that like
why would you not put him up there? Because look, let me interject first and say, I am the first person to tell you stop reaching back to the past because you think that it's some sort of representative of what's going to happen in the future. It's not. But I do think Lindy's different here. He was good in Jersey 2 years ago. I know he didn't get goaltending this year. It's not like you're just trying to go back and hire someone because of past success who really hasn't done anything. He actually has. I think he'd be my number 2 guy. I have Rod Brindamore number 1. I would have Lindy number 2. I think go back and forth. The other guy that you didn't mention, Boudreau, is that because he's 69 years old? I don't know, but I'm torn on Berube. Like, yeah, he went in, he won a cup when he went to St. Louis, and then it wasn't bad. But what happened after that? He had an under 500 season. Then he was under 500 again when he wound up getting fired 28 games into this season. So I don't know. I'm not necessarily super impressed.
I've never been that impressed with St. Louis talent, though. Like, I don't think that they have very talented, like, it's relative. They won a Stanley Cup, right? Like, how could you not have a talented team if you've won a Stanley Cup? But since then, I've never been that impressed with the teams they've had. Lindy's interesting because Lindy got atrocious goaltending in New Jersey this past year. Atrocious. He also had unbelievable talent offensively, and they weren't able to make it work. So I just think that since he's left Buffalo, he's been fired by 2 different teams. Are any other teams calling him? If his name wasn't Lindy Ruff, if his name was, I don't know, some made up name, are we even having this conversation about a guy who has been fired 3 times in the last decade?
I would say we're not having this conversation unless he played for the Buffalo Sabres, if it was when it was Phil Housley, Michael Pekka, right? I mean, nobody's really thinking Michael Pekka unless other than Buffalo Sabres fans when it comes to head coach, because he's Michael Pekka and played for the team. I do think Lindy's different. Man, he's one of the all-time winningest coaches in the NHL. He didn't win a Stanley Cup, but yes, he just had success in Jersey a couple of years ago, and he's actually a very, very successful NHL coach who's still only 65 years old.
I don't like the idea of, I could be completely wrong. I never covered Lindy Ruff. I don't know Lindy Ruff at all. I know Lindy Ruff as Matt Beauvais, the Sabres fan growing up, watching games on like when Alex Tuck is asked in the locker room about Lindy Ruff, he is answering the question as a fan. He's not answering the question as a guy on the team. So I get it that it would re-energize the fan base. I think it's probably their backup plan. Because, like, I don't think anybody else is calling Lindy Ruff. But I also think that tells you what you need to know about potentially hiring Lindy Ruff. You are interviewing Craig Berube because you think that all of the other teams are also trying to interview Craig Berube. If you don't talk to Lindy Ruff for the next 2 weeks, he's still going to probably be available. to coach.
I agree. I don't think that should be the deterrent though, because nobody else would call him, because he does mean a little bit more to this organization. And I do think that that could, mean a little, I don't want to contradict myself. I'm the person who says, don't reach back to the past for that reason. But Lindy's different to me. Lindy, this isn't Ted Nolan, who, you just knew they were doing it just because they had to do something. They were tanking and whatever. Just put a guy back there fans like.
I will say this. I think there's going to be a lot of people on the outside. I was pretty down on the Sabres for like most of the year, just because they've really underachieved and they deserve all the criticism that they've had go their way. I still think it's a desirable job, because I think they've got some really impressive pieces. And I know we don't exactly know what Tage Thompson is. We don't exactly know what Dylan Cousins is. But you know who they do have? Rasmus Dahlin, who is so good. He is exceptionally talented. He's still so young. Like, he is a cornerstone piece. And by the way, he's probably going to be the next captain of the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah.
So like, that's a guy I think that a team will get behind, because he just does everything the right way. So I think that there are enough pieces that this would be if you're a hockey coach, like, I think this would be a team, this and Jersey would be teams you'd want to go to, because there's a lot of talent. Jersey's got to figure out the goaltending, but for the Sabres moving forward, I think you feel pretty comfortable going into next year with UPL and Levi.
Well, it is always game day in Buffalo. We did not mean to spend so much Sabres talk with you, but
just a couple
guess what? It's all good. But it's all good. I love it. And hopefully you stuck around for it. If you stuck around this long, we appreciate it. For our producer, Mike Robier, I'm Sal Capaccio, Matt Bove at WKBW TV Channel 7. You guys got a lot of stuff coming up for the draft. You said the draft is on WKBW, correct?
Yeah, draft is on WKBW. Also, we should say this. We didn't say this. 2 congratulations are in order. One, yes. Jackie Walker, semi-retiring from Channel 4. I work at a different station. Still, absolute icon, legend. Number 2, going to Channel 2, our friend John Scott.
Yes, for
taking the sports director job there. Now we are literally direct competitors of each other, but much respect, much love. Congratulations to him. So congratulations, some moving and shaking in the landscape of Buffalo media this week.
Yeah, you're not going to see one of those Anchorman brawl scenes with the 2 anchor departments. We never know. It's through the news departments, sports departments, but you never know.
I told John when he got the job. So he and Josh Reed are both from Ohio, and I am from here. So I said, our next order of business will be, commercials that are like, do you like Ohio? No. Do you like Buffalo? Yes. And then it'll be like my face and their faces. It'll be fun.
That's amazing. I love that's a great marketing campaign. All right. Next time we talk, we're going to have Mike North on. Shoot us your schedule questions on It's Always Game Day in Buffalo. We've got the video at Sal Sports on the YouTube channel. And of course, wherever you pod, It's Always Game Day in Buffalo.